Hello everyone, welcome today to Shiver Me Timbers. Now, this channel is going to be basically us going over random stories that find people's interest that have occurred in history. So, on the first episode today, we are going to be talking about possibly the worst Olympic marathon race ever recorded in history. Now, this race took place in 1904 on a hot August afternoon. Now, this race would have 32 male participants dressed largely in white t-shirts and shorts, gathered at the newly constructed Frantic Olympic Field in St. Louis, Missouri. Now, of course, as I stated at the beginning of the video, this would probably go down to be one of, if not the worst marathon ever ran in the history of marathons. Now, the St. Louis World's Fair, also known as the Louisiana Purchase Exposition, took place in the same city as the 1904 Summer Olympics, and it was overshadowed by it. The games were originally scheduled for Chicago, but World's Fair organizers snatched them away from the rival city and added them to the exposition, reducing the prestigious event to a mere sideshow. Furthermore, St. Louis was a second-tier city that was very difficult to reach, which kept almost all of Europe's top athletes away. Only 62 athletes from 10 different countries competed outside of North America. The remainder, nearly 600 athletes, came from Canada and the host country, with a majority belonging to the latter. 9 men from Greece, 1 from France, 1 from Cuba, and 2 from South Africa lined up for the 40-kilometer marathon. Only 3 had actual long-distance running experience, having competed in the Boston Marathon. The rest were merely amateurs who had never attempted anything resembling a marathon before. Felix Carbajal, a runner from Cuba, had arrived at the last minute. Now, Carvajal traveled to the United States to compete in the Olympic marathon, but lost all of his money gambling in New Orleans, Louisiana, of course, forcing him to hitchhike and walk the rest of the way. He showed up to the race wearing long pants, a white shirt, and walking shoes. A fellow competitor eventually cut his trousers at the knees to make it easier for him to run. Lin Tayin and John Mashiani, 2 other competitors, were members of the South African Swanee tribe, who were in St. Louis as part of the South African exhibit at the 1904 World's Fair. During the recent Boer War, both had worked as long-distance message runners. Although newspapers reported that both ran barefoot, photographs taken during the event show at least one of them wearing shoes. Although their historic significance was probably unknown at the time, Lin Tayan and Jan Mashiani became the first black Africans to compete in the modern Olympic Games. The race began at 3:03 p.m. during the hottest part of the day. The route took us through unpaved country roads that kicked up a lot of dust and made breathing very difficult. The men had to constantly avoid crosstown traffic, delivery wagons, and railroad trains, as well as climb at least 7 hills ranging in height from 100 to 300 feet, some with brutally long ascents. To make matters worse, the entire route had only 2 water stops, one at 6 miles and another at 12 miles. The Olympics' chief organizer, James E. Sullivan, purposefully wanted to minimize fluid intake to test the limits and effects of, quotes, purposeful dehydration. No surprise, only 14 of the 32 runners finished the race. The worst ratio of entrants to finishers, and by far the slowest winning time, 3 hours, 28 minutes and 45 seconds, nearly 30 minutes slower than the second slowest winning time. Fred Lors, an American distance runner and bricklayer by trade, was the first to cross the finish line. Lors did all of his training at night because of his day job, and he earned his spot in the Olympics by winning a special 5-mile race, sponsored by the Amateur Athletic Union. Lors went on to win the Boston Marathon the following year. The crowd began cheering, "An American won!" as Lors sprinted into the stadium for the final lap. He was about to be presented with the gold medal by Alice Roosevelt, President Theodore Roosevelt's 20-year-old daughter, when someone called an indignant halt to the proceedings with the charge that Lors was an imposter. Lors began suffering from cramps at the 9-mile mark and hitched a ride in a car for the next 11 miles waving at spectators and fellow runners as he passed. Lors jumped out of the car when it broke down and finished the race on foot in under 3 hours. Lors claims that he finished the race as a joke and never intended to accept the honor when his deception was exposed. Now, despite his uncomfortable shoes, Felix Carvajal, the one who had arrived in street clothes, trotted along at a reasonable pace. Carvajal had reportedly gone 40 hours without eating and was dying of hunger when he saw a spectator eating peaches. He requested the one, but the spectator declined. Carvajal grabbed 2 and ate them while fleeing. A little further along the route, he stopped at an orchard and snacked on some rotten apples. He lied down and napped because he had stomach cramps. Despite this, he finished 4th place. On to William Garcia of California. One of the runners nearly died after inhaling dust from the country roads and suffered a near-fatal stomach hemorrhage. Garcia started coughing up blood and passed out on the side of the road before being found and taken to the hospital. Dust had coated his esophagus and ripped the lining of his stomach. Sam Mellor, the 1902 Boston Marathon winner, was also overcome by dust. After 16 miles, he dropped out of the race. John Lorden, the 1903 Boston Marathon winner, began vomiting after 10 miles and left the race as well. South African's Lin Tayin had proven to be a very capable runner and was well positioned until he was chased a mile off course by a pack of wild dogs, leaving him 9th out of the 14 finishers. Now, Jan Mashiani, another South African, finished 12th. Now, Thomas Hicks eventually won the race, but he had to be coaxed and assisted by his trainers at several points along the way. Hicks began to become dehydrated at the 10-mile mark. He begged for a drink, but they refused, sponging out his mouth with warm distilled water instead. Hicks' legs were given out 7 miles from the finish line when his trainers decided to feed him egg whites with a pinch of styrfrin sulfate. This compound is used as rat poison in high doses. However, it is a stimulant in small doses. As a result, Hicks became the first Olympic athlete to use a performance-enhancing drug. Hicks received his 2nd dose of Starsheen and brandy with only 2 miles to go. Hicks forced himself to walk up the first of the last 2 hills, Starsheen coursing through his veins. Hicks was hallucinating at this point and thought he still had 20 miles to go. He begged for something to eat and just a place to sleep. Over the last 2 miles of the road, Hicks was running mechanically, like a well-oiled piece of machinery, race official Charles Lucas wrote. His eyes were dull and lusterless. The ashen color of his face and skin had deepened. His arms looked like well-tied weights. He could barely lift his legs, and his knees were almost stiff. Then finally, when Hicks swung into the stadium, he had to be carried across the finish line. Hicks moved his feet back and forth as if he were running, while his trainers held him aloft. He was crowned the victor. Now, Hicks had lost 8 pounds during the race and declared, "I have never run such a tough course in my life. The fantastic hills simply rip a man apart." The marathon itself was dubbed a man-killing event by the Post-Dispatch 2 days after it took place, and the race was removed from future games. James Sullivan also spoke out against it, telling the newspaper that a 25-mile run is asking too much of human endurance. Remember, it was the same James Sullivan who claimed that drinking water during a race was harmful and insisted on only 2 water stops along the course. Now, for the next 5 years, Hicks ran marathons before relocating to Winnipeg, Canada with his 2 brothers. The following year, Carvajal returned to St. Louis to compete in the inaugural All-Western Marathon, finishing 3rd. The Greek government sponsored him to run a marathon in the Athens Olympics in 1906. However, he vanished after landing in Italy and never made it to Athens. He was declared dead in his homeland, only to return a year later. He eventually turned pro, defeating American distance runner Henry W. Shelton in a 6-hour race in 1907. And to top it all off, Fred Lors, who nearly stole the gold medal, went on to win the 1905 Boston Marathon fairly and squarely. I hope that you guys enjoyed not only this beautiful, crazy, disgusting story of what a marathon. But I hope that we could all connect on this story, and I hope that in the future we can connect on more stories. And I hope you guys tune in again very soon for my next one. Take care, and don't let your timbers get shivered on the way out.